Good afternoon, and welcome to the OSD Historical Office Speaker Series. It's being recorded, so please remove your badges. The video will be made public. My name is Glenn Asner. I'm the Deputy Chief Historian of the OSD Historical Office. Our speaker today is Dr. Robert P. Watson. He's a prolific author, media commentator, and a professor of history at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. He has written more than 40 books on topics ranging from the War of 1812 and First Ladies in the White House to President Truman's role in the creation of the State of Israel. Dr. Watson is the founding editor of the journal White House Studies and the editor of a popular book series published by the State University of New York Press and the American Presidency. He's here today to talk about his critically acclaimed book, Nazi Titanic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Watson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Can everyone hear me okay? Back of the room? Okay. First off, thank you for your public and military service. It's an honor to be here. And my favorite part of these programs is always the Q&A, so have at me. There's a lot to talk about. So first off, just a sort of background in terms of how we got into this. Sometimes the story of discovery is as interesting as the story itself. So I'm an historian, and I wrote on the Revolution. I'm working on a book now on the Civil War. Worked on Lincoln and Washington. But as an historian, I wanted to write on World War II and the Holocaust. Who doesn't, right? So I was thinking about what topics on World War II and the Holocaust I could write about. And my thought was, I'll knock off World War II and then I'll work on a project on the Holocaust. The challenge, of course, is we have so many fantastic historians who have already written on those topics. So the key is what hasn't been done. And I thought long and hard about it, and I came up with the topic for World War II. I think the one aspect of the war that's not been adequately covered is the final week of the war in Europe. We all know that World War II was interesting and unique in that it was the first war that had embedded journalists, war combat historians, right? The Nazis documented everything. It was filmed. So we have insights on that conflict more so than anything else in history. However, the last week of the war, the Nazis were too busy dying, running for their lives, committing suicide. It wasn't recorded, basically. And then, of course, the Red Army from the east, us from the west, the Brits, the Canadians were all rushing toward Berlin. The last week was absolute chaos. So I thought, okay, let me look at the last week-ish of World War II. We'll start on April 30th with Hitler's suicide. Cyanide, bullet, and his body then burned in the garden. The trifecta, the hat trick. We'll start there and we'll go a week-ish later to VE Day. So that was going to be the book. That's such a large topic, and how does one properly give credit to the world's bloodiest and most important conflict, right? 60 to 80 million people dead worldwide, 6 million plus Jews in the Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll make each day a chapter, and we'll find a story of love and a story of loss each day. And that personalizes something that's too big to otherwise wrap one's brain around. So maybe two folks against all odds survived the concentration camp and were reunited. Maybe a baby was born, right? Who's the last soldier to sacrifice his life? And that, you know, that's the kind of stuff I was looking for. So I was digging around and I came across a letter from a major in the British Army named Till. And Major Till says at the end of the war, he said, of all the horrors of the war, the one that will haunt me for the rest of my life is when thousands and thousands of Holocaust survivors and prisoners of war all died when we were ready to sign the surrender. And I thought, what? I've never heard of that. So you go to the source. So I contacted the Holocaust Museum, in Washington, the Imperial War Museum, one of my favorites in London, and said, what is this guy talking about? We have no record. I said, I didn't think so. Maybe, is it a prank letter? Is it, who knows what it is? Now, my life is really exciting. I go to archives for a week and sit in the basement and read really old letters. Then I write a book about it so my son can go to college. And then I come to places like this and talk about it. That's my life. Which means, as my wife tells our friends, if you need your oil changed in your car, I'm not your guy. If you have a really old family letter, I'm so your guy, okay? But everything about the letter looked real. So I set it aside and I went back searching for my stories of love and loss and triumph and tragedy. And by dumb luck, which is always how history works, I would estimate that half the books I've written, I never intended to write. And then you find something and it's like, wow, that has to be written. And I find a second letter. This is from General Mills Roberts. He's a British general, 6th Commando, which is Special Forces. And Mills Roberts says, I was there and watched everyone die at the end of the war. And I thought, okay, it's too good. It's got to be true. So I call everyone again, called World War II historians, and people said, no, nothing happened that matches this description. So as you all know, and as Glenn knows, and Tony better than anyone, you can follow every military unit's, which missions they were involved in the war. So I found Till's unit and General Mills Roberts' unit, and I followed them through the war. What battles they were in, casualty counts, et cetera, et cetera. And then right at the end of the war, there's no record. And they both, it just disappeared. So either A, it's one heck of a coincidence, B, they were abducted by aliens, which, we don't traffic in that, or C, I thought maybe it was classified. Maybe this story's legitimate. I went online, and there's information online that alludes to this event. It's just the problem is none of it's written by scholars, people with credentials, nothing's refereed, right? And if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. If a tree falls in the wood and someone with credentials or a PhD doesn't document it, for scholars it didn't happen and there's no sound, right? So I can't trust that. So long story short, my research suggested that this is probably classified in the National Archives or the National Archives in London, the Royal Archives. So I contact the Royal Archives and the Imperial War Museum and others week after week after week. I think you're sitting on one of the big stories of World War II or the Holocaust that people don't know, and I'm getting nowhere. It's basically click, like who's this crazy guy? I'm calling back, I'm emailing, I've written books, I'm an historian, I really believe, and I'm giving them all the information, I'm getting nowhere. So I'm speaking at the anniversary of D-Day in Normandy years ago, and I'm walking along the beach and I meet a woman there who's one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. She's a Hollywood filmmaker who won an Academy Award for a documentary she did on the Holocaust and the Kindertransport. And she's about my age, which is to say a really youthful mid to late 50s. She's fascinating, so I say, listen, can we have dinner tonight? But would you mind, my wife and my children are along. I brought them for the, this remarkable event. I want my kids to meet men that stormed the beaches at D-Day. And she says, no worries, would you mind? My parents are here. And I go, of course not. So in Walker Parents, down in South Florida, I ran for about 12 years a weekly town hall lecture series for about 1,500 people. And Eric and Gloria, this woman's parents, sat in the front row every week for 12 years. And in they walk. I say, Eric and Gloria, what the heck are you doing here? They said, we're here for your lecture. I'm like, oh my gosh, you could get that in Florida. You didn't. Turns out Gloria, Deborah, the filmmaker, Deborah Oppenheimer, her mother was a Kindertransport survivor. Her father was at D-Day, right? And I knew all that. And then I look and I go, wait a minute, this is your daughter? How did it slip your mind and not tell me your daughter won the Academy Award? If my daughter did, that would be my speech today, right? And then she looks at me and she goes, oh my gosh, my parents love your books. You're the one that they go to listen to all the time? I'm like, yeah, they got to get out more socially, right? So she goes, they love your books. Tell me about your books. And I go, it's nothing as interesting as hanging out with Morgan Freeman and Dame Judi Dench, right? Your stories. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm working on. And I told her this story. And I said, I know it's there. I found enough information, the letters, and she goes, listen, no worries. I know Prince Charles. I know the head of the Imperial War Museum. I know Judi Dench. I know Sir Attenborough. Let me make a few phone calls. And I'm thinking she had way too much wine, right? 2 days later, I get an email. Debbie called. She says that you found something, what can we help you with? From the head of the Imperial War Museum and the head of the Royal Archives. So I resisted telling them what I wanted to say, that I had spent weeks and weeks and weeks and gotten nowhere with them. So I laid out my story. I think this is what happened. I think this is where it is. These are the units involved. It happened between about May 1st and May 5th, 45, so the final days of the war. And 2 days after that, I'm in Paris and I check my email. I get an incoming email. Eureka, we found it. There were classified documents in London, and they were supposed to be classified top secret until the year 2045, making it a 100-year secret. Now, England has a 30-year national secrets law. After 30 years, they pretty much declassify everything unless if there's a compelling interest. I don't think there was some grand cabal to hide this. I think they just missed it. Everyone, go back to May and June of 1945, and there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of documents being sent from the European theater back to London. And there's a 20-year-old soldier who served and lost loved ones, and he wants to see his mom, and he's driving the forklift, unloading his 15,000th box of, right? And everything's put away. And you remember the closing scene in Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? It belongs in a museum, right? You know, it's one of these things. If you go into the National Archives and do work, and you go into the Library of Congress, you go into the one in London, it's massive, it's cavernous. And it appears that just among the thousands and thousands of documents was a box of this story. So now that I hopefully have your attention, here's the story. Go ahead. So the Germans love, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's still the case, the Germans love their ships. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the German ship culture, craze about ships, it's equivalent to, let's say, in America in the 50s and 60s, you know, the cars with the big whale tail kind of a thing. It's equivalent to that love of, so consequently, the Germans built some of the world's greatest ships. World War I was particularly difficult for the German people, obviously as the belligerent nation. After the war, deindustrialization, right, everybody, demilitarization, and it put Germany on its knees socially, economically, politically. But Germany lost most of its beloved ships, and some of its ships that survived the war were then confiscated by the victors. There was an incident at the end of the war as the ships were being taken to Scapa Flow, which is in Scotland, that some of the German admirals scuttled their ships. They would rather scuttle their ships than let the victors have the ship. So remember that point. That's where we're going to end up in about 20 minutes or so, okay? So that's the craze of the love of ships. So at the end of World War I, Germany's on its knees, and in the 1920s, the great ship company Blohm & Voss, they're still in business today. They have major headquarters in Hamburg. Basically, if you're a Middle Eastern sheik and you want the $1 billion yacht, they're the ones that build it. And in Hamburg, South America, or Hamburg Süd, S-U, glottal stop D. Tony, correct my pronunciation, he's a German historian. So Hamburg Süd operates this ship. They want to build a great ship. Obviously, they need to get back into international trade. It'll help the economy, but also for German pride. So they built a replica of the Titanic. She's called the Cap, C-A-P, Arcona, A-R-C-O-N-A, named for Cape Arcona, which is in northern Germany, southern Baltic, the only big cape on the German coastline. And she's launched in the late 20s, and she's a magnificent ship. She looks like the Titanic, right, everyone? Except that she has 3 funnels instead of 4 funnels. Next. Here's an ad, I believe. Yeah, here's an ad for it. You can see the specs on the left. This ship would be equivalent today to, let's say, the Queen Mary II, right, the QM2, in terms of its luxury, like the Titanic. It has the grand ballroom, the chandelier, the steps, you know, the iconic steps, the 7-course dinners, the orchestra. She makes over 90 trips to, she specializes in going to South America, Brazil, Uruguay, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. They even name a tango after this ship, the Cap Arcona Tango. They have a tango band on board. The ship is so legendary that when she stops in ports in Europe and South America, people all gather at the fence to get a look at the new Titanic, basically, at this Cap Arcona. In Germany, they made playing cards, and instead of a king or queen or whatever, they had the captain and the crew for the face of the playing cards. So it was a beloved ship. Next. Here's some images. You can see it looks like the inside of the Titanic. Models, A-list Hollywood actors, European monarchs, all sailed on this ship. There was actually a hot tub at that period in time, tennis. You can see the opulence. It looks like the Titanic. Everything changes, of course, in 1933 when Hitler comes to power. It turns out Hitler loves big ships. And Hitler then starts nicknaming the Cap Arcona, of course, the Nazi Titanic, which is partially the title of where my book title comes from. So Hitler refers to it as the Nazi Titanic. He tasks Joseph Goebbels, his head of propaganda and public enlightenment, with using this as a propaganda tool for the Third Reich. Basically what Goebbels does is he announces to the world, your Titanic sunk. Ours is still afloat, and the world is clamoring to get on it. So every time a Hollywood actor, World War II, Hitler and Goebbels and company don't want to lose their beloved ship. So what they do is they send it to the Polish coast, which, if you remember from World War II, one of the last areas of Europe and the last areas of Germany that were hit hard was northern Germany along the Polish coast. There near Gdynia, which the Germans had renamed Gottenhofen, they set the ship. Now they stripped off all the beautiful paint so that she wouldn't be an obvious target, and there she is sitting and rusting. They use her as a naval barracks and a floating naval training platform for their Kriegsmarine, their naval officers, and there she sits. There she sits until 1942, when something else happens. In 1942, in a rare moment of lucidity, Hitler meets with Goebbels and senior Nazi commanders and says, you know what? We could lose the war. Obviously, North Africa went south, right, everyone? They're kicked out. You know, Rommel's defeated, which is quite a task. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Front, that goes belly up. Operation Sea Lion. In the West, they're going to invade the British Isles, right? But before they invade the British Isles, the Luftwaffe is going to bomb the British back to the Stone Ages. And in one of the wonderful outmanned, outgunned upsets in world history, a few British pilots, right, RAF pilots, beat back the Luftwaffe, inspiring Churchill to give one of his greatest speeches, The Few, right, everyone? So Hitler says to Goebbels, we could lose this thing, therefore, I'm tasking you, as my propagandist, to come up with a new propaganda scheme, something so grand, so horrific, so diabolical. It sounds like Austin Powers or something, you know? Something so diabolical that it changes the course of the war. And it makes the world hate the Allies and love us. Now, what is this great scheme? Hitler doesn't know and Goebbels doesn't know, but they're working on it. Here's what Hitler and Goebbels did know: movies. They loved Hollywood movies. It was not uncommon for them to spend a weekend with 3 back-to-back-to-back Hollywood blockbusters, even though a war's going on. And they would have translators, interpreters, and here he is watching a movie over their shoulder. And then Hitler and Goebbels fancied themselves connoisseurs of fine film. They thought they were Germany's Siskel and Ebert, I guess I could say. And I'm guessing some of the younger folks in here have no idea what I'm talking about. Ask the generals, okay? So they were connoisseurs of film, and they would sit for an hour after watching the movies and debate the cinematography, the script, the acting. That's the kind of a thing. And we know that the movie that Hitler hated the most was Casablanca, because it was basically an anti-Nazi propaganda film, right, everyone? But you didn't know it was, because it's wrapped up as a great action drama romance. Hell of a script, great actors, great film. Hated Casablanca. The movies Hitler liked the most, let me see if I put them up here. If not, I'll tell you what they are. There we go. These are his favorite films. Gone with the Wind, King Kong, and I can't make this stuff up. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So I have a daughter, and when she was little, we watched it about 25 times. And of course, it's a German-based film. It takes place in Black Forest, right, in a German hamlet. So these are the movies they watched over and over and over again. Next. So this is Leni Riefenstahl, who was Germany's greatest director at the time. Hitler pulls her out of, she was kind of a B movie star, and gives her an opportunity to direct his grand Nazi propaganda film, which next to the film I'm going to talk about in a moment is probably considered to be the most diabolical, expensive propaganda film in history, Triumph of the Will. And she films the giant Nazi party rallies in Nuremberg, right, which was an important symbolic city for the Germans. That's why the 1935 Nuremberg laws, which began a lot of this nonsense, took place there. That's why the Allies afterwards used Nuremberg for the main tribunal. How symbolic, right? And she was a gifted filmmaker. When you watch this movie, it's brilliant to watch, but of course, it's so difficult to watch. But what she does is she comes up with new cinematography techniques. She's the first to put a camera on a dolly on rail tracks so that she can race it by with these sweeping scenes. She has her cameramen dressed in uniforms, so you're kind of, marching along with these thousands of goose-stepping Nazis, right? Also, Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler were, let's say, vertically challenged. So when she filmed them, she had like a 15-foot podium. But they would look so small behind it that she had them raised up above it. And then she dug a trench at the foot of it and filmed up out of the trench to give perspective. And also the beginning of Star Wars with the big block letters, long time ago in a galaxy. She would open her films, a long time ago in the German came a Messiah, right? And then Hitler's plane would emerge out of the clouds or the sun, sort of the way Darth Vader's or whatever, And then he would land and he would walk out as the Messiah to the people. So Hitler loved her movie. He's like, we need something like this, but the problem is this is propaganda. We need something like Casablanca. It's an action drama romance. So Goebbels writes that one day they were watching movies, and the movies were so powerful that after watching the movies, instead of debating the cinematography for an hour, they just sat emotionally drained. Now, I've tried to find out what movie they watched, but that wasn't in the archives. I've contacted scholars that write on this. We don't know. It's gone. But everybody in here, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler, right? After Frozen, right? After the movie, you're just, you can't do anything but sit there and feel emotional. So they're doing that, and they're watching the credits run, and Goebbels writes that's when they had their idea. When watching the credits run, to their horror, they realized that all the great directors, producers, cinematographers, scriptwriters, actors were all Jewish. And Goebbels wrote that he kicked over all the chairs in the room, so it must have been like this, portable chairs. And that's when they said, that's it, here's the idea. You, Goebbels, are going to produce the world's greatest propaganda film, a Casablanca. Now, Goebbels' typical movies, and I think I might have put some of them, yeah, there's Goebbels. Jude Seuss, the Jew, and Der Wigger Jew, the Eternal Jew. All of Goebbels' disgusting propaganda films, anti-Semitic propaganda films, were all very sophomoric. When you watch them, it's the same storyline. There's an idyllic German village until a Jewish guy moves in, and he kind of looks like Dracula. Unless you miss the obvious, there's the ominous, foreboding music. It gets dark. In some of the films, rats follow the guy around. And then the people have enough of it, bad things happen, they rise up like in every Dracula movie and either kill him or chase him out of town, everybody lives happily ever after. So Hitler says, no, I don't want this. I want Casablanca. I want action, drama, romance. So there's a German scriptwriter named Bratt, B-R-A-T-T, who long before James Cameron was working on a script for Titanic. He realized this would be 1,000 years from now, there will still be a Titanic exhibit at a museum that everybody goes to, and there'll be another Titanic movie. We have a morbid, enduring fascination with these kind of shipwrecks, right? So Goebbels and Hitler say, that's it, we'll make the Titanic, but we're going to make the Nazi Titanic. And we have a star for the movie, don't we? They have a ship. They have a replica. So they repaint the ship, put the fancy carpet, the chandeliers, get it all dolled up, and they're ready to film. They reassign units of the Wehrmacht, the military, and Kriegsmarine to be extras. They want a Cecil B. DeMille-esque, and my students have no idea who Cecil B. DeMille is, cast of thousands, greatest story ever told, right? So they're going to be all the extras. And even though they're in the middle of the war, Hitler and Goebbels authorized an unlimited budget to make this film. The most beautiful actresses, the most handsome matinee actors, those are all. The problem they realize is they can't find a director. All the great German directors are in the concentration camps. So they finally find a guy named Herbert Selpin, S-C-L-P-I-N, and I think I've got a picture of him. Okay, there's Hitler and Goebbels watching their masterpiece of propaganda, their diabolical film that's going to change the world. There, the guy on the lower right with the glasses that looks like, if you're in central casting and you need the artsy director, that's your guy, Herbert Selpin. He was nicknamed the Hedgehog. He was real difficult to work with, but a brilliant director. Now, he's an odd choice to direct this grand movie because he's not a loyal Nazi. He's the perfect choice because he makes action, drama, romance hybrids. I went back and watched one of his films, when I was doing my research for the book, and it was basically Indiana Jones. It's about the dashing professor and, aren't they all, really, you know, who goes to Africa, fights the locals, finds the treasure, gets the girl. It's Indiana Jones. But it had all the elements there, so they hire Herbert Selpine. There's an actual poster from it. The guy next to him is the square-jawed, you know, handsome lead. There's the captain on the top, and you can see a sinking scene on the top right. Now, fortunately for history, everything that could go wrong with the film went wrong. They ran over budget, they were delayed. One of the lead actresses got pregnant from one of the soldiers. They want to film the sinking at night because the Titanic sunk at night for realism. The problem is Germany's under a mandatory blackout because of Allied bombing. And to film at night, you need those big, you know, ballyhoo Hollywood lights. So Goebbels and Hitler authorized an exemption that they could light up, you know, and film. They light it up and the Allies bomb the set. So everything's going wrong for him. Hitler is breathing down Goebbels' neck. Where's my movie that's going to change the war? Goebbels is breathing down Herbert Selpine's neck. Selpine's breathing down his crew's neck. Selpine shows up on set one day. He had been drinking. Something goes wrong. He snaps. Curses Hitler, curses Goebbels, curses the Nazi Party and the Wehrmacht. Obviously, he's summoned to Berlin, where they kill him. This was among the archives. He's sent to see Joseph Goebbels, and they hang him. Now, they have to finish the movie, but surprisingly, none of the directors want to complete the film. They find a B-movie guy named Verner Klinger, and he finishes the movie. So Goebbels sits down to watch, you know, the most epic propaganda film that's going to change the world. And when he watches it, he's mortified. He realizes there's an unmistakable parallel. The movie's about a captain who's out of touch with reality and diabolical, aka Hitler, who takes a ship and runs it in an iceberg, Germany into the war. The innocent people on board are drowning the German people. There's an obvious parallel there. And of course, the Kriegsmarine lost countless thousands upon thousands of sailors, right? And any family member in watching this, it could be very insensitive. Also, from the grave, Herbert Selpine has some of the last laughs. It not only has Nazi propaganda embedded in the film, but there's some anti-Nazi propaganda. So Goebbels orders all copies of the film destroyed. Fortunately, copies made it out to Prague, Paris, and elsewhere, and still survive. You can watch them on YouTube. A number of people and me have put them up on YouTube. Well, my kids and students did, because I don't know how to do such things because I'm over 50, with English subtitles, and you can watch the film. Now, the film is both fascinating to watch and, of course, deeply, deeply disturbing. What makes it fascinating is the following. I think James Cameron's Titanic is a decent movie, but my favorite Titanic movie is the British film from 1958, A Night to Remember. Anyone? Okay, yeah, I think that's far better. Here's why. All the ship sinking and death scenes, they took the Nazi footage and used them in the movie. Goebbels didn't have copyright, right? So they took them all and they put them in the film. So when you watch it, oh, there's a poster for the Nazi film that ends up being banned. Go ahead. There. So this is the actual, there's the Cap Arcona. That's the Nazi Titanic. This is from A Night to Remember. Next, I think I put a couple more in if I yeah. So all these scenes were actually the extras who were German actresses and the Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine extras, and they actually filmed the ship. So it's kind of haunting when you watch it. You can actually see the legendary, infamous Nazi Titanic. Go ahead, let's see what else we have. Okay, so let's fast forward to the end of the war. In February and March of 1945, Hitler issues his infamous liquidation decree. I want all camps and everybody in them eliminated. No evidence. So February and March of 45 are two of the most difficult months in world history as the slaughter just ensues. Heinrich Himmler enters our story now. Himmler sends a note to concentration camp commandants saying, if your camp is not yet liberated or liquidated, I don't want the prisoners to fall into Allied hands. Now, what does that mean? Kill them, move them, save them? He was vague. Obviously, he couldn't say his true intentions, or if he was caught, he would be put to death. He then dispatches some of his minions to go talk to the concentration camp commandants, and here's what he wants. Any prisoners of war or concentration camp prisoners not yet liberated or killed, he wants them all moved to Hamburg, which is in north-central Germany, 60 kilometers from the Baltic, to a concentration camp, KZ Neuengamme, Neuengamme. Why would Himmler want thousands upon thousands of folks moved? Here's the plan. He then orders them all march to the Baltic. He wants to put them on a ship and presumably sail the ship to parley with, I don't know, Ike, Churchill, Truman, which is just crazy. And he wants two things. He wants to negotiate a separate conditional surrender on the Western Front. I mean, this shows you how whacked he was, right? Secondly, he wants to exchange the prisoners for his own life. So what ship does he order brought to the Baltic to load everybody up on? The Nazi Titanic. The ship is so big on the Baltic, it's Lübeck Bay, L-U-B-E-K, in the port of Neustadt, Neustadt. The ship is so big it can't dock. It has to drop anchor 3 kilometers out. And in late April and early May, there's this macabre, this gruesome scene where they're just running launches with 100, 500, 1,000 prisoners and concentration camp survivors out to the ship and stuffing everybody below deck, sealing the hatch, no food, no water, complete darkness. But so they'll run one skiff out, with 100 people, then it'll come back with 10 dead, then they'll run another one out with 100, then they'll throw 20 bodies over. So for days, we don't know how many people were loaded up. The Nazis aren't keeping meticulous records, and they're loading the ship, people are dying, they're loading it, people are dying, day after day. Of course, Hitler commits suicide. His new bride, Eva Braun, he even killed his favorite dog, his German Shepherd Blondie. Joseph Goebbels goes to the bunker with his 6 children and his wife, kills all of his kids and wife, kills himself. Later, Heinrich Himmler would be captured and commit suicide. Hermann Goering, the Luftwaffe commander, would be captured and commit suicide. So it's just absolute chaos. There are 2 German officials at the Baltic coast. One is the head politician, like a mayor or governor for us. His name is Karl Kaufmann, with a K and a K. The other one is a Gestapo official named Count George von Basewitz-Behr, B-E-H-R, like the paint. Those 2 say, we don't want all these prisoners. There's thousands at the port, thousands on the ship. The war's ending, so those 2 come up with a plan. They fill the Nazi Titanic with gas and prisoners. When we're forced to surrender, now we're back to Scapa Flow at the beginning of my remarks, we're going to scuttle her. We're going to put her on the bottom of the Baltic, taking everyone with her. 1, we will deny the Allies from getting the Fuhrer's beloved Nazi Titanic. 2, the world will forget about the Titanic, because many, many, many more people will die on this ship than on the Titanic, and they did. So that's the plan. Right when the Nazis are ready to blow the ship, the British 6th Commando, remember General Mills Roberts, the second letter we talked about? The British 6th Commando, on a lightning strike, called in by an intelligence officer who would go on to a very fine literary career, Ian Fleming, call in this strike. They eliminate the Nazis at the port. Now they make, within an hour. It's not the Wehrmacht, the regular military, it's the Volkssturm. Those are the, teenage boys and older men with outdated rifles. They wipe them out, and they're forcing them, May 3rd, 1945, 14:30, they make them surrender that afternoon. While they're inking the, go ahead, I think I put some pictures of this. Oh, okay. Well, Berlin is in ruin. Hitler's down to Hitler Youth and the Volkssturm defending Berlin by the end of the war. There's Hitler, Blondie, and Eva Braun. Let's see what else I put up there. Okay, there's Himmler on the far left. I'm not going to talk about the White Buses campaign for lack of time. I'm a little over time. Go ahead. Okay, the far left, that's Count George von Basewitz-Behr, the Gestapo official, and walking next to the Fuhrer, that's Karl Kaufmann. These are the 2 that come up with the plan. We're going to, Karl with a K, Kaufmann with a K. We're going to load the ship up, blow it. Right when they're ready to blow it, the British 6th Commando take them out and force them to sign a surrender. Thousands at the port, thousands on the ship are saved. As they're doing that, they hear a deafening roar. They look skyward, and a sky blackens. 6 squadrons of the RAF, the Royal Air Force, fly into the Baltic and blow the ship up as they're literally signing. The ship is blown, lifted out of the water, dropped back in, a Titanic-esque tear in the fabric of the ship, blown through the hull. It's sinking, thousands die instantly. Thousands are blown overboard. The Baltic Sea in May is about 42 degrees Fahrenheit. So hypothermia, right? You survive the World War II, the Holocaust, a death march of 60 kilometers, and days on board a ship without food, water, medical attention. Folks die in the water. The planes that hit them, and I think I put a picture here, a Typhoon, yeah, these are Typhoons. A Typhoon is not a big bomber like our B-17s or B-24s or the British Lancasters, right? It's not a small fighter like our Mustangs or a Spitfire. It's in between. You could put 1 to 2, you could put 2 of them in this room, okay? What they do is they bomb and fight. They're a little too big to be an effective air-to-air fighter. They're a little too small to be effective massive bombers, so they specialize in trains, tanks, and ships. So 6 squadrons of these fly in. You can see a 60-pound rocket, which is 6 foot tall, underneath it. Each one is carrying a 500-pound bomb. You can see on the wing there, they have twin 20 millimeters. After bombing the ship, they strafe the people in the water. Then they race down the port. One of the pilots, Alan Weisse, W-Y-S-E, wrote that as he raced down the port, there's thousands of living skeletons with striped, at the port. He races down the port. He wrote that he was sawing, S-A-W, torsos in half. I mean, these things shoot bullets like this, right? So he's just tearing down the port. And then they fly back to the bases in whatever parts of liberated Europe they came in. It's a devastating attack. Let's see what else we have here. There's the Nazi Titanic on fire. I didn't know that they were taking, I thought that these kind of aerial photographs really didn't come in until Korea, but in World War II they were doing it. Here she is. There's Alan Weisse's quote from the declassified documents. "We used our cannon fire at the chaps in the water. We shot them up with the 20 millimeter cannons in the water. Horrible thing, but we were told to do it, and we did it. That's war." How could this have happened? The incident we're looking at is arguably the worst case of friendly fire in world history. It's the single bloodiest hour of the Holocaust and World War II, and it might be the world's worst maritime disaster. We don't know exactly how many went down in a ship or in that event. I offer estimates in my book based on the best guesswork one can do. My guess is there were between 4,500 and 7,500 people on the Nazi Titanic. There were 3 other ships, the Deutschland, which was a big ship like the Titanic, docked next to her. The Deutschland goes down with about 2,500. The Aten and the Teal were cargo ships at the port. They had about 2,000. One of them goes down. There were maybe a couple thousand people that died at the port, and my guess is around 10,000 would have died on the death march. If you start to do the math, this is just a jaw-dropping and shocking incident. We have another one. I'll end with this. There she is. So amazingly, a few people made it off the ship. 2 of them were brothers, Berek and Józek Jakubowicz, Poles as the name would suggest. They were teenagers when they were taken to concentration camps. One of them survived Auschwitz, and they were then reunited, and then they were sent to Neuengamme in Hamburg, then sent to the ship. So these teenage boys survived things that no one should be able to survive. They were in one of the deep holds below deck, filled with people. They said we were living in a couple of inches of feces and urine. So the only way they could sleep was they piled the dead up and sat on them, or slept on top of the dead. As the ship is rolling over, as she's filling with water, this deep hold underneath the ship starts filling. So everybody's drowning instantly. The 2 brothers tread water. As they're approaching the ceiling, the hatches are locked, so they're done. At the last minute, some brave souls, concentration camp survivors from the top deck, went below decks, risking their lives to open up the hatch. Hands came down and pulled the two Jakubowicz brothers, Jozek and Berek, out. Then they go running. As they're running, I'm dating myself, but the Poseidon Adventure, anybody? Okay, Ernest Borgnine, Shelley Winter. When I was reading the declassified documents, I kept going, oh my God, it's the Poseidon Adventure. They would have to swim in a flooded area. A hallway would be on fire. And in order, as the ship's rolling, to get to the top, you got to go to the bottom. That was the quandary in the old movie. So they and their rescuers are running down one hallway. The end of the hallway is on fire. So they turn around, the flames come down the other end of the hallway, so they're done. They get on, the Jakubowicz brothers get on one another's shoulders and they tear out an air duct. One climbs up, pushed by the other, reaches down and pulls the brother up. As they put their hands down to rescue their rescuers, they're all incinerated by flames. So the brothers run out on the deck. As the ship is rolling, the funnels break loose. This is a couple of ton bowling ball killing everybody on deck. People are going in the water. The two brothers shimmy across the deck as it's rolling to get to the side or bottom. The problem is with all the fuel and the fire, the metal is cooking them alive. So Berek, the older brother, says, we got to get in the water. Jozek says, I can't swim. They give their brotherly goodbyes. Jozek stays, he's burning. Berek goes down the anchor line into the water. Berek's picked up by a German fisherman who would never tell him his name. I tried to find out the name because I wanted to have him listed as among the righteous Gentiles in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, but I couldn't find the name. He pulls a couple of survivors out of the water, takes them to a bakery in town. They're naked, they're freezing, they're starving. There's no food in the bakery, but they can light the ovens and wrap up in the burlap sacks that brought in the flour or whatever. Berek wrote that in the morning the doors kicked down, and he thought they're done with the Nazis. It was the British military, 6th Commando. And he's rescued. They take him to the local hospital. When he goes to the hospital and walks in the door, guess who's sitting in there? Jozek, his brother. That night, the British went out to the ship, and Jozek piled the dead up and sat on them again for a second time so he wouldn't burn. Jozek and Berek were saved. They moved to Boston, lived just north of Boston. They got married, had good careers, kids, grandkids. As of a year ago, I called, Berek's wife was still alive. There were two others, and then I'll end this. Bogdan Sokowiak, another Pole is the name would suggest, and Francis Akos, A-K-O-S, who was Hungarian. He was, as a teenager, the principal violinist for the Budapest Jewish Philharmonic. They also survived multiple camps, death marches, days on the ship. They go into the water. Now, everybody's dying of hypothermia, or as the ship's going down, the suction is pulling people under the ship. They somehow survive. So a German boat comes by and plucks them out of the water, but then they realize they're Jewish and they're concentration camp prisoners, so they throw them back in the water. Remember, they're 3 kilometers out. These guys swim to the shore. I want you to think about this. They survived the Holocaust. They survived the death march, days in the ship in 42-degree water. Michael Phelps could not have swam the shore. This is superhuman. As they're getting to the shore, when the British 6th Commando eliminated the Volkssturm, a few Hitler Youth and young naval cadets ran into the woods. They come out of the woods, and there's all these survivors lying along the beach that made it ashore. The naval cadets and Hitler Youth have no bullets left in their guns, but they're bashing in skulls. So these guys swim back out in the water, and they're treading water. Again, this is a remarkable feat. They finally make it ashore, naked, freezing, starving. They're walking to town. They hear a German voice behind them, hands up, criminals. And they turn around, and there's a young kid with a gun. They're done. Right then, the kid, they hear machine gun burst, the kid crumples. It's the 6th Commando comes running up along with the Scottish 15th, and they rescue these guys. Francis Akos moves to Chicago and becomes the first chair principal violinist of the Chicago Symphony. Retires as the concertmaster. Talked to him right before his passing a couple years ago, and his daughter, who was the concertmaster of the San Francisco Symphony. So in closing, there's simply more we don't know about history than we do know. History still has her secrets, including some whoppers.